The rain had no business being that loud. It hammered the glass walls of the private terminal like it was trying to get inside, like it had something urgent to say. And Jin-Woo Park sat alone in the lounge with his hands wrapped around a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched, staring at the version of himself reflected back in the storm-streaked window. 38. Still young by most standards, ancient by others. His suit was perfectly pressed, his jaw was perfectly set, and behind his eyes was the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace. It comes from a man who trained himself not to feel anything, because the last time he felt everything, it destroyed him. He set the glass down, picked up his phone, put it back. Then, very quietly, barely above a breath, he said something he hadn't said out loud in years. Alisha. Just her name, nothing else. The way you say a word you know has no answer. He'd been doing that more lately, saying her name to empty rooms, to rain-soaked windows, to the particular silence that fills a life when the one person who made it make sense is gone. 6 years. 6 years since the car. 6 years since the fire. 6 years since a police officer stood at his door with his hat in his hands and that look on his face. The look that means what it always means. And Jin-Woo had simply nodded and closed the door without a word and sat in the dark for 4 days straight. People thought he was grieving. He was memorizing every detail of what the world owed him. But none of that, not the empire, not the power, not the quiet war he'd spent 6 years winning. None of it prepared him for what happened at 30,000 feet, somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, on a Tuesday night that started like every other Tuesday night, and ended with Jin-Woo Park gripping the armrest of his first-class seat so hard the leather cracked. Because that's when he heard her voice, and everything he'd buried came back alive. Stay with me, because this story is about love and loss and the terrifying possibility that some things don't end the way we're told they do. This is City of Tales, and if you've never been here before, hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell the stories that stay with you. Let's go back to the beginning. Jin-Woo Park was 22 years old the first time Forbes mentioned his name, and 25 the first time a government was afraid of it. He'd built his tech empire the way most brilliant, dangerous men build things. Fast, quietly, and with a ruthlessness that other people called ambition, because they didn't have a better word for it. Park Technologies had offices in Seoul, Singapore, London, and New York. It employed thousands of people who had no idea that their CEO also controlled a shadow network that moved information, money, and leverage across 3 continents in ways that never showed up on any public ledger. He wasn't a criminal in the way that word usually gets used. He was something more complicated than that. He was a man who had grown up with nothing, clawed his way into everything, and somewhere along the way decided that the rules that applied to other people were simply not written with him in mind. Not out of arrogance exactly, more like a very calm, very rational understanding that the world is divided into the people who control systems and the people who get processed by them. And Jin-Woo Park had made his choice about which side of that line he intended to live on before he was old enough to drive. He was respected. He was feared. He was, by nearly every measure available to a man in his position, untouchable. And then he got on a flight from Los Angeles to Seoul, and a flight attendant with deep brown eyes and a laugh that sounded like it belonged to someone who had never been cynical a day in her life, spilled a glass of Bordeaux directly onto the lapel of a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She gasped. She apologized in 3 rapid, overlapping sentences. And then, when he didn't react the way she expected, when he didn't get cold or corporate or reach for his phone to call someone, she looked at him, really looked at him, and laughed. Not nervously, not performatively, just genuinely, like the situation was objectively funny and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. No one laughed at Jin-Woo Park. He didn't know what to do with it. So he laughed too. Her name was Alisha Carter, 23 years old, tall and striking with smooth, dark skin and deep brown eyes that held your gaze like they were deciding something about you. She had a small, crescent-shaped birthmark on the left side of her neck, just below the jaw, and she wore her hair natural and full, and she moved through that aircraft cabin like she owned it, in the best possible way. Like she was genuinely delighted to be exactly where she was. She loved her job. She loved people. She loved the sky, she said, because the sky was the one place where everyone was just a person in a seat, and all the things that made them important or powerful or difficult on the ground just became irrelevant at altitude. Jin-Woo found that idea incredibly strange. He also found himself thinking about it for weeks afterward. He found reasons to book flights he didn't need to take. She noticed. She thought it was funny. Eventually, she agreed to dinner, and then to a second dinner. And somewhere in the architecture of those early months, something happened to Jin-Woo Park that he was completely unprepared for. Someone got past the wall. Not through it, not over it. She just walked up to it, looked at it, and apparently decided it wasn't her problem. She talked to him like the wall wasn't there. She disagreed with him without drama. She asked him questions about his childhood that no one ever asked, and she didn't let him deflect the way he deflected everything else. "You don't have to be feared all the time, Jin," she told him once, lying across his couch on a rainy Saturday afternoon with her feet in his lap and a book open across her chest. "You can just be loved." He didn't say anything back, but he kept that sentence somewhere he could find it. They were married 11 months after the wine incident. It was a small ceremony. Jin-Woo didn't do large, and Alisha wore a dress the color of winter champagne, and she cried happy tears at the altar, and he held her hands and felt, for the first and only time in his adult life, that he was standing in exactly the right place. His people were there. Her family was there. His right-hand man, the man who had been with him since the beginning, a sharp, quiet figure named Hyun-soo, stood at the edge of the room and watched with unreadable eyes and raised a glass when it was time to raise a glass. For 3 years, it was the best version of Jin-Woo's life. She made him slow down. Not enough. He was still who he was, but enough. She made him take mornings off. She made him laugh. She made him, in small increments, a person instead of a machine. And he, in turn, wrapped a layer of protection around her that was so thorough and so absolute that it never once occurred to him that the danger could come from inside. That was the mistake. That was the one he would spend 6 years paying for. The accident happened on a Wednesday night in November. She had been driving home from the airport after a long international rotation, and somewhere on a stretch of highway outside the city, something happened. A collision, the police said, a catastrophic impact followed by fire. The car was unrecognizable by the time emergency services arrived. The body inside was burned beyond identification. Dental records confirmed it was her. Jin-Woo stood in a grey room and listened to a detective explain this to him, and he nodded at each piece of information like he was processing a business report. He signed the documents. He made the arrangements. He stood at a grave in the rain 3 days later, with his hands in his pockets, while people who loved her cried around him. And he didn't cry. He couldn't find the switch. He found other switches instead. In the 18 months after Alisha's death, 3 of the most powerful figures in a certain criminal network that had been operating with total impunity across the eastern seaboard quietly ceased to exist. No bodies, no evidence, no press. They were simply there, and then they were not. The people who understood such things understood that Jin-Woo Park had become something he wasn't before, something with no ceiling on what he was willing to do, because the thing that had previously functioned as his ceiling was in the ground. He never talked about her. He never took the photographs down either. 6 years passed. 6 years of empire and silence, and the particular discipline of a man who has decided that forward motion is the only motion available to him. He was 34 now. 34, and technically one of the most successful men in his industry, and absolutely hollowed out in a way that only he could feel. He boarded the transatlantic flight on a Thursday evening because his New York office had a situation that required his presence, and his private aircraft was undergoing maintenance, and his head of security had swept the commercial first-class cabin and confirmed it was acceptable. He settled into his seat. He put his headphones in. He opened a document on his laptop and started working. The cabin door closed. The engines began their slow acceleration toward noise. A flight attendant moved through the aisle doing final checks, and then she spoke. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you anything before we take off?" The voice went into him like a key into a lock. Jin-Woo's hands stopped moving on the keyboard. The entire world went very still. He knew that voice. He knew it the way you know your own name. Not because you learned it, but because it's been inside you from before memory. He knew the pitch of it, the warmth, the particular cadence of it. Slowly, he turned his head. She was standing in the aisle with a smile on her face and a small tray in her hands, and she was wearing the airline's uniform, and her hair was pulled back, and she had deep brown eyes and smooth, dark skin, and a small crescent-shaped birthmark on the left side of her neck, just below the jaw. His glass hit the floor. The entire first-class section turned to look at the sound. Jin-Woo was on his feet before he understood that he was standing. "That's not possible," he said. His voice came out strange. Not cold, not controlled. Ragged, the way a voice gets when the body is taking over from the brain. "That's not possible." She stepped back. Her smile was gone, replaced by something cautious and confused. "Sir, I'm sorry. I think you might have me confused with someone else." "Your neck," he said. "That mark on your neck." Her hand went up involuntarily to touch it. "Sir, please, I need you to sit down." "What is your name?" A pause. The kind of pause that has something behind it. "Alyssa," she said. "Alyssa Reed." He sat down, not because he was calm, because his legs stopped working. Alyssa Reed excused herself as quickly and professionally as she could manage, and Jin-Woo sat in his first-class seat for the next 9 hours and felt like a man standing on a shore watching the ocean pull back before a wave. That terrible, suspended moment when you understand that something enormous is coming, and there is absolutely nothing you can do but wait for it. He watched her. He couldn't stop. Every time she moved through the cabin, he tracked her, the way you track something you're afraid will disappear again. Her gestures, the way she tucked a strand of hair back from her face, the small sounds of her laugh when she spoke to another passenger 3 rows up. Everything was Alisha. Everything. The way she tilted her head when she listened, the set of her shoulders, the particular way she said thank you that made it sound like she meant it beyond the transaction of the moment. But she didn't know him. Her eyes moved across him with the professional blankness of a stranger, and each time they did, something in his chest tore a little more. The plane landed at JFK at 6 in the morning. She was off the jetway and gone before he reached the gate. But Jin-Woo Park had not built what he built by letting things disappear. By noon, Hyun-soo had a file. Alisha Reed, 25 years old, American citizen, currently employed by a premium international airline, based in New York. No prior incidents, no criminal record, no debt, no notable connections. And before that, nothing. Hyun-soo placed the file on the desk carefully. "The records before 6 years ago," he said quietly, "don't exist." Jin-Woo looked at him. "No childhood school records," Hyun-soo continued. "No family history in any searchable database. No social security activity before 6.5 years ago." She appeared fully formed, with a new identity and a clean slate. Whoever built this background was very good. Jin-Woo leaned back in his chair. The silence in the room was the specific kind of silence that happens when a very intelligent, very dangerous man is realigning everything he thought he knew. "She wasn't in an accident," he said. "It wasn't a question. Dig into every network we have access to," he said. "I want to know who built her new identity. I want to know who paid for it. And I want to know why." He found her 3 days later. He'd known her patterns by then: the neighborhood, the coffee shop she went to every morning, the park she cut through on her way home. He wasn't proud of how thoroughly he'd assembled this information. He wasn't interested in pride at the moment. He stepped out in front of her on the sidewalk outside her building on a grey October evening, while the city moved around them like it always does, indifferent and loud. And she stopped walking, and her face went immediately wary. "You were on my flight," she said. "Yes." "How do you know where I live?" "I need you to listen to me," he said. "I know how this looks. I understand that everything about this situation is something you want to walk away from. But I'm asking you to give me 5 minutes. Sir, my wife died 6 years ago." His voice cracked on the last 2 words, and he couldn't stop it. "Her name was Alisha Carter. She had a birthmark on her neck, exactly like the one you have. She had your voice, your eyes, your hands. And I have a file in my office that says you didn't exist before the exact same month she was supposed to have died. And I need you to help me understand that, because I cannot—" He stopped, took a breath. "I cannot bury her again if there's a chance she's standing in front of me." Alisha Reed stood very still. Something moved across her face that wasn't just fear. Something more complicated. Something that looked, for just a second, like standing at the edge of something she'd been told her whole life not to look over. "I don't know you," she said. "I know. I don't know who Alisha Carter is." "I know that too." A long pause. Rain started, the light kind, barely there. "5 minutes," she said. They sat in a coffee shop around the corner, and he talked. He kept it factual, kept it contained, showed her photographs on his phone, their wedding, their apartment in Seoul, a weekend they'd spent in a cabin in Vermont, where she'd made him learn to play cards for the first time, and had beaten him 4 times in a row, and been almost offensive about how happy that made her. He watched Alisha look at the photographs with the expression of someone trying to locate a sound they can't quite hear. "This doesn't prove anything," she said. "People look alike. People don't have the same birthmark in the same location. It could be coincidence." "You have no childhood," he said quietly. "You have no family. You didn't exist before the exact month my wife was declared dead. Those are not coincidences. Those are signatures." She looked out the window. "I have a life," she said. "I have memories. I have a life." "I know. I'm not here to take it from you. I'm here because if someone did this to you, if someone took something from you without your knowledge or consent, you deserve to know what was taken." She didn't say anything for a long time. And then she said, almost inaudibly, "Sometimes I dream about a man's hands." His throat closed. "They're holding my hands," she said. "I can't see his face, I can't see anything. Just hands, and they feel—" She stopped. "They feel like home." He put his hands flat on the table between them. Neither of them said anything. She looked at his hands for a long time. Then she looked up at him, and for the first time, something in her eyes wasn't the careful, guarded expression of a stranger. It was something older than that. Something that didn't have a name yet, but was looking for one. "What do you want?" she asked. "The truth," he said. "That's all. Just the truth." The medical evaluation took place at a private facility Jin-Woo trusted with his life. He didn't pressure her. He made clear repeatedly and explicitly that every step was her choice, that she could stop at any time, that he would ask nothing from her beyond whatever she chose to give. She agreed to the DNA test with the particular resolve of someone who has decided that not knowing is worse than knowing. They waited 48 hours for results. 48 hours of Jin-Woo sitting in a waiting room that he owned in a building that he controlled, feeling more powerless than he'd felt since he was 7 years old and had nothing. When the doctor came in, he read Jin-Woo's face before he read the results. "It's a match," the doctor said. "Complete, definitive, irrefutable. Alyssa Reed and Alisha Carter were the same person." She was sitting across from him when he told her. She didn't cry immediately. She had the same response he'd had 6 years ago, standing in that grey room. She processed it like data, like something that had to be sorted before it could be felt. And then, very slowly, her breath started to change. And then the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady and quiet and relentless. The kind of crying that happens when a very large understanding moves through a person and rearranges everything on its way out. "Who did this to me?" she asked. And that was when Jin-Woo started to pull at the threads. What he found underneath changed everything. Alisha, the woman he had married, the woman who had made him believe in something, had not simply been a flight attendant with a beautiful laugh and an inability to let anything be ordinary. She had, in the months before her death, been quietly, methodically documenting something. Something she found through a connection at work. Something she hadn't yet told him. A trafficking network. Not street level, not the kind that makes the news. The sophisticated kind. the kind that operates through shell companies and private logistics routes and powerful people who've purchased enough protection that the word accountability doesn't apply to them in any conventional way. The kind that stretches from Southeast Asia to Western Europe and has nodes in cities that would surprise you. The kind that, when Jin-Woo traced its structure, had connections, partial, peripheral, deniable but real, to certain contracting arrangements within his own business network. He sat with that for a very long time. Alisha had known, or suspected. She'd been trying to figure out how deep it went before she said anything. She was protecting him from having to know, or she was protecting him from himself, or she was trying to find an answer that didn't blow everything apart. He would never know exactly what she was thinking. But what he knew was that before she could surface any of it, someone who was watching very carefully decided she was a problem, and someone who had access. Someone who knew her routines, knew her schedule, knew exactly what a conclusive death would need to look like. Not someone from outside. Someone inside. Hyun-soo had been with him for 11 years. Jin-Woo went through every piece of evidence twice before he let himself believe it. He needed it to be wrong. He needed to find the detail that would exonerate the man who had stood beside him through every war, every crisis, every loss, including, he now understood with a nauseating clarity, the loss that Hyun-soo himself had engineered. There was no exonerating detail. There was only the money trail, and the communication records, and the testimony of a low-level operative who, when offered a choice between silence and consequences, chose to talk. Hyun-soo had been bought before Alisha ever got close to the truth. He hadn't arranged her death because he wanted her dead. He'd arranged her disappearance, the fake identity, the memory erasure, the buried records, because the network she was about to expose had resources and reach, and a dead wife draws attention, but a ghost is just a ghost. He told himself, Jin-Woo would later learn, that he'd done Jin-Woo a favor, that Alisha had been making him soft, that the man Jin-Woo was becoming with her was a liability. They faced each other in the back room of a warehouse in New Jersey on a cold November night. Jin-Woo and the man who had been his closest ally since before he had anything worth protecting. The man who had attended his wedding and raised a glass and then, 3 years later, erased the person he'd married because she was getting inconvenient. Hyun-soo wasn't apologetic. That was the part Jin-Woo would think about afterward. The part that stayed. Not the anger, not the betrayal, but the fact that Hyun-soo genuinely believed he had done the right thing. Believed it with the clean conscience of a man who has rationalized something so thoroughly that the original shape of it is no longer visible. "You were becoming weak because of her," Hyun-soo said. Calm. Certain. Jin-Woo looked at him for a long time. "You don't know what I was becoming," Jin-Woo said. A single shot ended the conversation. Jin-Woo walked out into the cold and stood in the parking lot for a long time, breathing. And somewhere in the city, Alisha was in a safe house with 2 guards he trusted with his actual life. Remembering. Because she was remembering. Fragments at first. The way memory returns after trauma. Not in order, not obligingly, but in pieces that float to the surface at odd hours and demand to be looked at. She'd wake up in the middle of the night with the taste of a specific dinner. She'd hear a piece of music and stop breathing for a full minute. She'd look at her hands and feel, with complete certainty, the warmth of other hands holding them, and know that warmth, know it bone deep, before she knew anything else. He visited every day. He didn't push. He didn't narrate. He brought coffee and sat with her and let her talk when she wanted to talk and be quiet when she needed silence. And he was better at this than he would have been 6 years ago, and they both knew it. She was teaching him things about himself even now, even like this, even across the wreckage of what had been done to them. He found, to his own surprise, that the man Hyun-soo had been so worried about him becoming was actually the man he wanted to be. The network took months to dismantle. It was not a clean operation. Nothing like that ever is. There were layers and proxies, and people who panicked, and people who fought back, and several nights where the outcome was genuinely unclear. Jin-Woo used every resource he had, legal, extra-legal, and the kind that don't have a category. And he did it not with the cold mechanical efficiency of a man protecting his empire, but with the particular ferocity of someone who has had something stolen and is reclaiming it. When it was over, it was actually over. No loose ends, no infrastructure left standing. Just the particular quiet that follows when something that should have been stopped a long time ago finally stops. On a Friday morning in the spring, 6 months after a flight attendant named Alisha Reed had looked up from a drinks tray and seen a stranger who turned out to be the person she loved, Jin-Woo Park sat on a beach in a place that didn't need a name and watched the water and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like herself. Not Alisha from before, not Alisha. Something that had absorbed both and was still figuring out its shape. She'd been doing therapy. She'd been sleeping better. She'd been learning, slowly, to hold the fact of what happened without it swallowing everything else. He came and sat beside her. No guards on the immediate beach, no phones, just the sound of the ocean doing what the ocean does, regardless of what humans are going through. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You never gave up on me," she said. He was quiet for a moment, watching the water. "I buried you once," he said. "I'm not doing it again." She laced her fingers through his. The sun moved lower. The water stayed constant. And then, from somewhere far behind them on the road above the beach, a black car sat still in a pull-off spot with its engine running. Inside, a man watched them through the windshield. He lifted a phone to his ear. He said, calmly, 2 sentences. "Target confirmed." She remembers everything now. He lowered the phone. On the beach, completely unaware, Alisha laughed at something Jin-Woo said, and the sound travelled up over the dunes and into the air and disappeared into the sky the way sounds do. And the car didn't move. Not yet. But it would. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know you belong here. Subscribe to City of Tales. New stories drop every week, and trust me, you cannot afford to miss what's coming next.